Hello and welcome to Twist List. Today we are looking at 10 unusual male witch trials from Europe. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, tens of thousands of people were executed for witchcraft in Europe. Then as now, witches were typically thought of as female, and most of the victims in the witch trials were women. However, men were occasionally accused and executed for witchcraft as well. Sometimes, they were linked with a female witch. Other times, they were accused independently. In a few areas of Europe, such as Estonia and Normandy, men actually made up the majority of the accused. At number 10 we have John Fionn. In late 1589, the Scottish King James VI travelled to Scandinavia to marry Princess Anne of Denmark. While sailing home, James and his new queen were stalled by terrible storms. Instead of bad luck, the Danish authorities blamed the weather on witchcraft, duly arresting and executing 6 supposed witches. Back in Scotland, some of James's subjects were accused of a conspiracy to magically sink the king's ship. After being taken into custody for treason and witchcraft, Fionn was tortured and interrogated. He confessed that the charges were true, escaped from jail, and then ended up being tortured again. This time, Fionn recanted his confession and refused to budge, even after having his nails pulled out and his legs crushed. Despite Fionn's resilience, his interrogators and King James VI weren't convinced. Fionn was strangled and burned at the stake in Edinburgh in January 1591. John Fionn, a schoolteacher, was allegedly one of the plot's ringmasters. According to the many wild legends surrounding him, Fionn could fly and unlock doors by blowing on their locks. In one bizarre story, Fionn asked a local boy to steal pubic hair from his sister. The hair was an ingredient for a love charm. But Fionn was tricked and given cow hair, making a cow fall in love with him instead. 1. The 9th spot on the list is occupied by Thomas Weir. Thomas Weir was probably the last person anybody would suspect of being a witch. He was an elderly veteran of the English Civil War, a stern, religious man who was greatly respected in Edinburgh. In 1670, however, Weir suddenly suffered a kind of breakdown. He'd been harboring a lifetime of guilt and wasn't nearly as saintly as everybody believed. Weir freely admitted to being a witch. He claimed that he'd slept with the devil and that his walking stick was actually a wand. In the end, Jane was repentant about what she'd done. On the other hand, Weir refused to apologize. Both brother and sister were sentenced to death, although curiously, only Jane was convicted of witchcraft. From the time his sister, Jane, was 16 until she was 50, Weir had repeatedly slept with her. He'd also had sex with his stepdaughter, his maid, and some mares and cows. 2. After the secret was leaked, Weir and his sister were arrested for incest. Jane not only confirmed her brother's claims but told the authorities that she and her brother were witches. Number 8 on our list is John Walsh. Not everybody who used magic in early modern Europe was considered evil. In England and Wales, for example, the White Witch used its magic for good. Since the label witch was a negative one, these benevolent magicians went by other names, like Cunning Man, Wise Woman, or Conjurer. Though they might have been popular with the ordinary people, these folk healers and seers weren't always safe from the law. Walsh's familiar would come to him in the shape of a dog, bird, or cloven-footed man. It could identify thieves and tell Walsh where the guilty had hidden what they'd stolen. Walsh swore that he never hurt anybody with his magic, but what ultimately happened to him is unknown. Witches were hanged rather than burned in England. Convictions were rare, so there is a chance that Walsh was acquitted and let go. 3. In August 1566, an English white witch named John Walsh was arrested and questioned in Essex about his powers. Walsh claimed that he was in contact with fairies and that he could tell when a person was bewitched. He also had a familiar, a supernatural creature said to help witches with their magic. At number 7 we have Thomas Luton. In September 1659, a merchant named Thomas Luton was plagued with gossip that he'd killed a neighbor boy. Luton had given the boy a plum. When the boy died a few days later, some neighbors believed the plum was bewitched. To clear his name, Luton asked the town bailiff to arrest him and give him a trial. A witchcraft confession was exactly what the authorities wanted. A day after his confession, Luton died in jail from his wounds. His corpse was burned and then publicly displayed. To cover the rest of his court costs, Luton's property was also seized and sold off. Luton was apparently confident that the judges would take his side, saying he didn't need a lawyer or counter-evidence to prove his innocence. As it happened, things turned out the exact opposite. His neighbors testified against him, and a torturer claimed that there was a devil's mark on Luton's body. After being strangled with a garrote, Luton told his interrogators that he attended Sabbaths and earned his wealth from money that the devil gave him. 4. Number 6 on the list is Kwiwe-Barson. The Sami, the indigenous people of Scandinavia, had a rich tradition of shamanism. Since ancient times, Norwegians had consulted Sami shamans, who maintained that they could tell the future and travel out of their bodies. The shamans used a special drum for their rituals, which put them in a trance and allowed their souls to roam around. Coincidentally, Johnson and his crew drowned during a storm on their way back. 2 years later, in May 1627, Barson was brought to trial by a court in Husvåg. He admitted to creating wind for Johnson's ship and explained how a Sami drum worked. The Christian court took Barson's words as proof of witchcraft, ruling him responsible for the drownings and sending him off to be burned at the stake. In 1625, the shaman Kwiwe-Barson was paid by a Norwegian named Niels Johnson to summon wind for a voyage to the village of Husvåg. 5. A while later, the wife of a man who left with Johnson paid the shaman again, asking for good wind that would bring her husband's ship home. This time, the spell went awry and Barson was afraid the wind was too strong. The 5th spot on the list is occupied by Andrew Mann. Today, fairies are regarded as harmless, fictional creatures, but some witchcraft interrogators believed that they were demons in disguise. Other interrogators figured that they were delusions caused by Satan. But whatever the cause, people who claimed to be involved with fairies were sometimes tried for witchcraft. Mann had other magical powers as well, such as being able to steal a cow's milk and tell the future. Chris Sunday acted as his familiar, and Mann could summon the angel by uttering the word Benedicite. Mann called Chris Sunday his lord and king, and he also said that he kissed Chris Sunday's bottom. To the authorities, the bizarre story reeked of the devil, and Mann was burned for witchcraft. In Scotland, several witch trials mentioned a figure known as the Queen of Elfing, a fairy queen who had an angel husband named Chris Sunday. Andrew Mann, an elderly man who went on trial in 1597, said that he had a sexual relationship with the fairy queen. 6. Mann had first met the queen 60 years earlier when he was a little boy. She later gave him the power to heal any animal or human. Number 4 on the list is Johannes Junius. Between 1624 and 1631, nearly 300 people were burned for witchcraft in the German city of Bamberg. The city was gripped with paranoia, and even government officials were suspected of being witches. In June 1628, the mayor Johannes Junius was questioned after he was allegedly seen at some Sabbaths. Junius took the new name of Crix, and the demon woman who converted him became his lover. The demon encouraged Junius to kill his children, but he refused, leading her to beat him on one occasion. 7. As with many other witch trials, Junius swore he was innocent until he finally broke down after being tortured. According to his confession, Junius met a demon woman who turned into a goat and threatened to break his neck unless Junius gave himself up to her. The woman disappeared and came back with more demons, and Junius was forced to renounce God and worship Satan. A few weeks before his death at the stake, Junius sent his daughter a secret letter from prison. He said that his words were sheer lies and made up things to keep himself from being tortured. He also mentioned his accusers, who admitted to lying and apologized to Junius before their own executions. At the 3rd place we have William Godfrey. In 1609, the farmer William Godfrey rented out a house to John and Susan Barber in New Romney, England. While living there, the Barbers would hear inexplicable dripping and knocking sounds on the ceiling, making them afraid that the house was haunted. After having a baby, Susan swore that 3 familiars sent by Godfrey tried to steal her child. The Barbers ended up leaving the house. The Holtons, the next couple to take the house, experienced ghostly phenomena, too. William Clark, a man who thought Godfrey had bewitched his ducks, was the first to testify. The trial lasted months. During the wait, Clark and Godfrey got into a brawl after Godfrey joked about bewitching Clark's mare. Other neighbors were brought in as witnesses, but the court ultimately acquitted Godfrey in February 1618. The only person charged with anything turned out to be Clark, who was fined for assaulting Godfrey. 8. It wasn't only Godfrey's house that weirded out his neighbors. The Barbers had terrible luck after moving to a new house and suspected that Godfrey was the cause. Strangely, the Holton's son, who suddenly fell sick in 1614, died an hour after Godfrey paid a visit to the house one day. After years of reputedly bewitching people and animals, Godfrey's neighbors finally took him to court in April 1617. At the 2nd spot is Konrad Stieklin. Konrad Stieklin was a healer and horse wrangler who lived in the German town of Oberstdorf. In 1579, Stieglin met a guardian angel who took him on a nocturnal journey to a strange and distant place. Stieglin and his angel would go on these trips several times a year, accompanied by other travelers known as night phantoms. The night phantoms helped turn Stieglin into a powerful healer, and he also learned how to identify witches. During his trial, Stieglin's night phantoms were interpreted as witches. His guardian angel was seen as a demon, and the strange and distant place was theorized to be a Sabbath. Furthermore, Enzensberger and another woman accused by Stieglin confirmed that his mother was a witch. Based on information from his night phantoms, Stieglin accused a woman named Anna Enzensberger of being a witch in 1586. Enzensberger was arrested, but Stieglin was also taken into custody. His stories about the night phantoms roused the authorities' suspicion, and soon Stieglin was being investigated as a witch, too. After the usual bout of torture, Stieglin confessed that everything was true. Ironically, the man who cried witch was sentenced to burn at the stake in January 1587. 9. And finally, at number 1. Tristan Shore runs a blog called Bizarre and Grotesque, where he writes about crime, folklore, and unsolved mysteries. In 1609, the French priest Father Romilin became convinced that two nuns, Madeleine and Louise, were possessed by demons. The women would go into horrible convulsions and cried and screamed when Romilin attempted to exorcise them. In February 1611, Gofridi was arrested and interrogated. He admitted that he was a witch, explaining that he had found a magical book in his uncle's possessions years earlier. 10. As he read the book, Gofridi inadvertently summoned a demon. The demon made a deal with Gofridi. In exchange for his body and soul, the demon would advance Gofridi's career and make any woman he wanted fall in love with him. Madeleine told Romilin that a priest named Louis Gofridi had raped her when she was 9 years old and that the same man had used spells to fill her body with demons. Months passed without the nuns getting any better, and they made more accusations against Gofridi when another priest exorcised them. Madeleine was questioned as well, and both she and Gofridi said they attended Sabbaths together. In April the same year, Gofridi was strangled and burned at the stake. Unsurprisingly, Madeleine was eventually accused of witchcraft herself. She was sentenced to life imprisonment but was let out early after serving 10 years. Louis Gofridi. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, then please hit the subscribe button.